They say family is supposed to protect you, to lift you up when the world tries to break you. But what happens when it's your own family that lights the match? My name is Nia Begay, and until last year, I owned an antique shop in San Francisco called Vintage Treasures, the legacy my grandmother poured her soul into. For decades, it was more than just a store. It was history preserved, memories alive, whispers from the past echoing in every corner. And then, my parents and sister demanded I hand over half. When I refused, they didn't just turn against me. They burned everything down. That night, I watched my life swallowed by fire. Flames devoured Evelyn's oak desk, the wall of family photographs, the rare first editions we hunted together. The smell of smoke clung to my skin as I sat helpless, listening to 50 years of her dream crumble into ash. But the fire was only the beginning. What followed was a courtroom battle that unearthed secrets darker than the smoke itself, lies about inheritance, forged documents, even the truth about who my sister really was. Reporters swarmed, headlines screamed, but beneath it all, I was left with one unbearable question. What do you do when the people who gave you life try to destroy it? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about survival. About rising from the ashes when the people you trusted most tried to reduce you to nothing. It's about choosing yourself, even when it means walking away from blood. So sit with me, listen closely, because what you're about to hear is not just my story, it's a warning, a reckoning, and a reminder. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who share your last name. My name is Nia Begay, 35 years old. Until last year, I was the proud owner of Vintage Treasures, the antique shop my grandmother left me in the heart of San Francisco. It wasn't just a store, it was the soul of my family's history, a sanctuary where every artifact whispered stories from the past. But when my parents and my younger sister demanded I hand over half of it, and I refused, they chose the cruelest way imaginable to settle the matter. They burned it down. I can still hear the silence in the courtroom when Judge Mariah Redbird revealed a hidden truth that shook the city to its core. The very next morning, my phone lit up with 66 missed calls from reporters hungry for the story. But it all began months earlier, with a will reading that turned my world upside down. Inside attorney Mr. Larson's oak-paneled office, my father Martin Begay sat stiff in a gray suit, jaw clenched like stone. My mother, Amanda, dabbed at her eyes, though her trembling was fueled more by anger than grief. And then there was Lila, my younger sister, slouched in her chair, scrolling her phone like she couldn't care less. When Larson read the final lines declaring that the entirety of Vintage Treasures, the building, the inventory, and the apartment above it were all mine, the air went heavy, like a storm pressing down on our chests. "This is outrageous," my father exploded, slamming his fist against the table. My mother let out a sharp sob, more theatrical than heartfelt. Lila shot to her feet, her chair screeching, and hurled a glass paperweight at the wall. Crash. Shards scattered across the floor. "What about me?" she screamed. "I'm family too. This is unfair." Calmly, Larson slid an envelope across the desk, a letter in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. In it, she explained why. She had seen me grow up inside that shop, learning every detail, every story behind each relic, while my sister had only ever asked for money. She wanted Vintage Treasures to live on, not be gutted by greed. My father's face darkened. "We'll fight this," he muttered, his voice like thunder on the horizon. "You manipulated her, Nia," my mother spat, her tears now edged with venom. I shook my head, throat burning. It was her choice. From that day forward, the attacks never stopped. The phone rang at all hours. My mother sobbed about her broken heart. My father hurled ultimatums. Cousins I hadn't seen in years texted me, calling me selfish. And Lila, her voicemails dripped with venom. "You think you can run that place, Nia? You're going to crash and burn. Give me my half before you ruin everything." Every night, I clutched my grandmother's letter to my chest. Her words became my anchor, reminding me that betraying her wishes would mean betraying her memory. I stood my ground. Taking over Vintage Treasures felt like walking a tightrope strung between skyscrapers. I poured every ounce of myself into keeping it alive. The antique clocks, the rare manuscripts, her touch was everywhere, and I honored it all. At the same time, I added my own vision. Monthly history talks, an Instagram page, a loyalty program. Against all odds, business didn't just survive, it thrived. A glowing review in the Chronicle called us a San Francisco gem reborn. Tourists lined up at the door. For the first time, I felt hope. But my family's bitterness only grew sharper. They tied up the shop's phone line with fake complaints. They posted one-star reviews online, accusing us of selling counterfeits. And then came the night my world cracked. On a packed Friday evening, the bell above the door jingled, and in stumbled Lila, reeking of alcohol, her voice slicing through the chatter. "This is my store too," she shrieked, and shoved an entire shelf of vintage glassware to the floor. Smash! Gasps filled the room as shards flew like sparks. "Stop this," I begged. "Lila, please, you're destroying yourself." "You stole it from me," she bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. 2 officers stormed in, escorting her out while she cursed my name. The look in my customer's eyes, pity, confusion, fear, shattered me more than the glass at my feet. The next morning, my father's voice thundered through the phone. "You had your sister arrested?" "She was drunk, destroying the shop. I had no choice," I whispered. "There's always a choice," he hissed. "You made yours, now we'll make ours." I felt the storm gathering, its shadow darkening my every step. I installed cameras. I filed for a restraining order, but nothing prepared me for what came next. At 2:30 a.m., the phone jolted me awake. A fireman's voice crackled on the other end. "Miss Begay, there's been a fire at your property on Market Street. You need to come right now." I raced through the empty streets, red lights flashing in the smoke ahead. And when I turned the corner, my lungs collapsed. The sky glowed orange, smoke curling like a living beast. Vintage treasures, my grandmother's dream. My soul was engulfed in flames. My bond with my grandmother, Evelyn Begay, was unlike anything I had with the rest of my family. Growing up in San Francisco, I spent nearly every weekend and summer in the small apartment above Vintage Treasures. I was her shadow, trailing her through aisles crammed with relics, running my fingers over tarnished silver lockets, chipped porcelain teacups, or worn Civil War buttons. She told me where each piece came from, who might have held it, what it once meant. Her stories gave life to lifeless objects. By the time I was 10, I could spot a genuine Victorian cameo from a cheap knockoff across the room. She taught me to haggle with estate dealers, restore faded oil paintings, balance the books in a ledger older than both of us. More than that, she showed me how to treat people, staff like family, customers with patience, and collectors with respect. "Nia," she would say, pressing her hand against mine, "we're not just selling things, we're keeping history alive. We're giving people a piece of the past to hold in their hands." Those words carved themselves into me. They shaped who I became. Vintage Treasures wasn't just her business. It was her beating heart, her legacy poured into every item. But to my parents, it was nothing more than dusty junk. My father chased real estate deals across the city, shaking hands at cocktail hours, flexing his status at charity galas. My mother trailed beside him in sequined gowns, more interested in appearances than substance. And my sister, 3 years younger, was their shining star. Her name was Lila, and she was spoiled in ways I couldn't begin to fathom. At 10, while she was handed a top-of-the-line laptop and a birthday party at Six Flags, I got a thrift store scarf and a pile of used history books. When she needed clothes, they took her to designer stores. I was sent to clearance racks. When she flunked out of college twice, they paid her rent, her car, her credit card bills. When she lost jobs, they bailed her out again. Me? I babysat at 14, waitressed at 16, scraped every dollar to put myself through college. I studied business and art history, my eyes always fixed on one dream, to inherit Vintage Treasures and carry it forward. I worked harder, valued every penny. Lila expected the world to bend to her, the way our parents always bent for her. The favoritism was a knife I learned to live with, but it cut deeper every year. While I cataloged rare books in the dusty back room, Lila was out at parties, burning through cash faster than she could spend it. Vintage Treasures became my refuge, a place where I wasn't the overlooked daughter, where I belonged. But time is cruel. I began to notice the changes in my grandmother, the way she leaned against the counter to catch her breath, how her hands trembled when she polished fragile glassware. She never admitted she was tired, too stubborn for that, but I saw it, so I showed up earlier, stayed later, rearranged displays with her on quiet Sundays. We laughed over tarnished jewelry, debated the best way to showcase typewriters, shared coffee as the morning sun cut across the front window. And then came that foggy Tuesday morning. I was at an estate sale across town, bidding on a 19th century pocket watch, when my phone buzzed. Stacy Lonebear, our head clerk, her voice shaking. "Naya, it's your grandmother." She collapsed in the back room. I dropped everything and sped through traffic. But when I reached the hospital, the doctor's face told me before his words did. A massive heart attack. Quick. Painless, they said. But nothing about it felt painless. The funeral was a blur. My parents turned it into a performance mahogany casket, towering flowers, a minister Evelyn had never met. Regulars from the store showed up with quiet condolences, their hands warm, their eyes kind. I stood hollow, like someone had carved a piece of me out. 1 week later, we gathered in Larson's office. I clutched a locket Evelyn had given me years ago. My parents sat tall, polished, determined. Lila slouched, scrolling her phone. And then came the will. To my granddaughter Nia Begay, I leave vintage treasures. She has been its soul as much as I have, and I trust her to carry its legacy forward. The silence after those words felt like a vacuum. My father slammed the desk. My mother wailed. Lila exploded. "This is ridiculous," my father barked. "That store belongs to the family, not just her. You manipulated her." My mother hissed at me, eyes glinting with fury. "What about me?" Lila shouted, her face red, tears streaking her cheeks. "I'm family too. This isn't fair." Mr. Larson quietly produced Evelyn's handwritten letter. She explained that I had dedicated years to learning every corner of the business, while Lila showed no interest beyond asking for money. She trusted me. She wanted me to preserve it. My father's jaw clenched. "Can we contest this?" "The will is airtight," Larson replied. My mother turned to me, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to us, Nia? How could you cut us out?" "This wasn't me," I whispered. "It was her choice." "You were always her favorite," Lila spat. "You played the perfect granddaughter to steal it all." And then came the threat that still echoes in my bones. "You have a choice, Nia," my father said, his voice low and cold. "Share the store with your sister, or tear this family apart." Taking over vintage treasures on my own was like stepping onto a tightrope with no safety net. I had worked alongside my grandmother for years, but running the entire operation, handling every vendor, every invoice, every customer was a beast of its own. The first weeks nearly broke me. I discovered unpaid bills stuffed in drawers, suppliers I'd never heard of, and an ancient air conditioner that wheezed its last breath during a summer heat wave. I barely slept. Some nights, I didn't even go home, collapsing in the small apartment upstairs, the scent of dust and old books wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My body ached, my eyes burned, but I refused to surrender. I held onto Evelyn's lessons like lifelines. I kept her signature displays intact, the antique clocks gleaming in the front window, the rare manuscripts carefully encased, but I added my own touches. I organized monthly history talks with local authors, created an Instagram page that told stories through images of our finds, and launched a loyalty program for returning customers. And then, like a fragile seed finally catching sunlight, the store began to thrive. Tourists streamed in after a glowing article in the San Francisco Chronicle praised the new energy in an old classic. Locals packed into our weekend appraisal events, booking every slot weeks in advance. An infamous antique blogger who had once dismissed us as just another dusty shop returned and wrote, "Vintage Treasures has been reborn under Nia Begay's care, a hidden gem of the city." For the first time since Evelyn's death, I breathed without the weight of despair crushing my chest. I felt proud. Like maybe I really could carry her legacy forward. But my family saw my success as an insult carved against their pride. Their anger sharpened into something venomous. The phone line at the shop lit up with constant complaints. Customers would hang up, confused, when no one was there. Later, I discovered it was my parents, calling during peak hours, tying up the staff with fake grievances about prices or missing items. Then came the reviews. 1 star after 1 star appeared online, claiming we sold counterfeits, that we scammed tourists, that I was a fraud hiding behind my grandmother's name. I recognized the wording. It was Lila's voice, dripping with envy even through typed words. I spent hours fighting with Yelp and Google, disputing the lies, sending receipts and proof. My hands shook with rage, but I couldn't let those reviews choke out everything I had built. And then the storm came crashing through the front door. It was a Friday evening in December, the shop buzzing with holiday shoppers. The bell above the door jingled, and in stumbled Lila. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy, the sharp stench of alcohol rolling off her like a wave. "This is my store too!" she shrieked, her voice splitting the air. Before I could react, she shoved an entire shelf of vintage glassware. Crash! Hundreds of tiny shards glittered across the floor like malicious confetti. Customers froze in stunned silence, mothers pulling children close, couples clutching their bags, eyes darting toward the exit. "You stole it from me, Naya," she screamed, her finger trembling as she jabbed it toward me. "You think you're some saint, carrying Grandma's dream? You're a fraud." "Lila, stop," I pleaded, my throat tight. "Please, you're destroying everything." "Good," she spat, swaying on her feet. "If I can't have it, no one can." Sierra Lone Bear, my head clerk, already had her phone out. "I'm calling the cops," she whispered, her hands steady even as mine trembled. Within minutes, 2 officers pushed through the crowd. They tried to calm Lila, but she lashed out, her curses echoing off the shelves until they finally dragged her toward the door. The entire room was silent, every customer staring at me as if waiting for me to apologize for a mess I hadn't created. I walked aisle to aisle, my heart hammering, offering shaky words of comfort. Some smiled kindly, others left early, whispering to each other. The damage was done not just to the shelves, but to the fragile trust I had worked so hard to build. The next morning, the phone rang again. My father's voice was thunder. "You had your sister arrested? Your mother hasn't stopped crying, Nia. Do you have any idea how low you've sunk?" "She was drunk," I whispered, my voice trembling but steady. "She wrecked the store. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," he hissed. His tone was ice. "You made yours, now we'll make ours." The words sank into me like a blade. My stomach knotted, a storm rumbling on the horizon. That afternoon, I hired a security company to install cameras around the building and posted a guard on weekends. I filed for a restraining order against Lila, gathering witness statements from customers and staff. But the war wasn't only fought in courts and paperwork. My parents began calling old family friends, weaving tales about how I had manipulated my grandmother, how I'd betrayed them. People I'd known my entire life began looking at me differently. Texts stopped. Smiles faded. Nods in the grocery store turned cold. Isolation closed in around me. And yet, in that loneliness, a few held me afloat. Sierra, steady as ever, rallied the staff to cover shifts when I collapsed from exhaustion. And Marin Oakes, a close friend who had known Evelyn, stopped by almost every night. Together, we combed through threatening texts, replayed security footage, drank bitter coffee until dawn. "You're doing exactly what she wanted," Marin told me one night, her voice quiet but firm. "Your grandmother always said you were the one meant to carry this place forward." Her words wrapped around me like armor. For a moment, I felt safe, but safety is fragile, and that night, I had no idea how quickly it would shatter. At 2:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another harassing call. But something in my gut told me to answer. "This is the San Francisco Fire Department," the voice said, urgent and grim. "There's been a fire at your property on Market Street. You need to come now." My heart stopped. The moment I turned onto Market Street, my lungs locked. The night sky glowed a violent orange, flames clawing at the darkness like a living beast. Sirens wailed, fire trucks lined the street, and smoke curled upward in thick, suffocating plumes. My grandmother's dream vintage treasures was burning before my eyes. I tried to run forward, but a firefighter caught my arm. "Stay back," he barked. The heat radiating from the building was unbearable, like standing in front of an open furnace. "That's my store," I choked, my voice breaking. "My grandmother's, everything." He shook his head, his face grim beneath the glow of flames. "We got here fast, but it was too late. The building's gone." Met. I sank onto the curb across the street, my body shaking as the fire devoured every piece of history Evelyn and I had gathered together. Each crack and crash inside the inferno was another artifact collapsing, another memory turning to ash. Her oak desk, the wall of photographs, the first editions we had hunted down together all gone. I sat there for hours, watching, my tears mixing with the bitter sting of smoke. By dawn, nothing remained but charred beams and a skeleton of brick. The shop that had been my refuge, my inheritance, my anchor, it was reduced to rubble in a single night. The fire chief approached, his voice heavy with the weight of bad news. "Miss Begay," he said carefully. "Early signs point to arson. We found evidence of foul play." "Arson?" The word tasted like poison on my tongue. He nodded. "Your cameras didn't survive the fire, but nearby businesses might have caught something." Later that day, they called me to the station. My stomach twisted as I watched the grainy footage from a pharmacy across the street. 2 figures lingered near the back entrance of my store at 1 a.m. The first figure's stride, I knew it, my father. The second, pacing nervously at his side, was unmistakable. My sister, Lila. Minutes after they disappeared, flames burst through the windows. I couldn't breathe. My own family, my blood. The people who raised me, who promised to love me, had set fire to everything I had left of Evelyn. That evening, the police moved quickly. They arrested both of them. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the scene. My father blustering, insisting it was all a mistake. My sister trying to charm her way out, crocodile tears streaming. When the phone rang that night, it was my mother. Her voice was trembling, but not with grief, with rage. "How could you do this, Nia? They're in jail because of you." "Because of me?" My voice cracked. "They burned it down. They destroyed everything Evelyn left us. If you'd just shared," she sobbed, "none of this would have happened. You've torn this family apart." Her words sliced through me, crueler than the fire itself. I hung up, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. The next day, my friend Marin Oakes showed up at my apartment, a folder clutched in her hands. Her expression was grim. "Nia," she said softly, "you need to see this." Inside were copies of the store's insurance policy. My eyes scanned the papers, and my blood went cold. The coverage for fire damage had been dramatically increased, signed with my name. Except it wasn't my signature. It was forged. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just anger. This wasn't just revenge. It was a plan. A calculated plot to cash in on my loss, to reduce my grandmother's legacy to nothing more than a paycheck. The walls closed in on me. I felt the world tilt, the air leaving the room. My family hadn't just betrayed me. They had conspired against me, planned to erase the one piece of Evelyn that remained, all for money. I thought I had already lost everything the night of the fire. But the truth was, the real devastation was only beginning. 6 months after the fire that gutted vintage treasures, I climbed the courthouse steps in San Francisco. Reporters swarmed me, their voices colliding in a storm of questions. Camera flashes blinded me, but I kept walking, clutching Evelyn's locket in my palm like a shield. Inside, the courtroom felt far too small for the weight of what was about to unfold. My attorney, Rachel Cooper, sat beside me, her papers neatly stacked, her focus razor-sharp. Across the aisle, my father, Martin Begay, and my sister Lila sat with their lawyer, a slick man named Timothy Grant, infamous for his theatrics. My mother sat behind them, dressed in black, her eyes fixed on the floor as though she could hide inside herself. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Patricia Ellis entered, her gaze sharp enough to slice through stone. Grant went first, his voice booming as he painted me as a greedy granddaughter who had manipulated a frail old woman into leaving me everything. "This is about fairness," he declared dramatically. My clients acted out of hurt, out of desperation to reclaim what should have been theirs. Rachel rose next, her voice calm, cool, devastating. She laid out the evidence, the harassment calls, the fake reviews, Lila's drunken outburst in the shop, and then the fire. She revealed the forged insurance policy, the signature that wasn't mine. This was no act of desperation, she said, her eyes steady on the jury. This was a calculated scheme to destroy Nia Begay's livelihood and profit from the ashes. Witness after witness took the stand. Sierra Lonebear, my head clerk, described the night Lila stormed into the shop. Drunk and violent, terrifying customers. Andrew Collins, the insurance agent, squirmed as he admitted he had pushed through a suspicious policy update at my father's request, a favor for an old college buddy. The fire investigator confirmed it was arson, gasoline traces found at the back entrance. Then came the emails. Rachel projected them onto the screen, each word echoing like a gunshot. My father's email, the new policy's set. Once it's done, we'll have enough to start fresh, and she'll have nothing. Lacquer. Lila's reply, can't wait to see her face when it's all gone. The courtroom buzzed with horrified whispers. My stomach twisted, bile rising. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth. I spoke of Evelyn, of everything she had taught me, of the nights I stayed awake rebuilding the store, of the phone calls, the harassment, the fire that stole it all. My voice shook, but I forced myself to keep going, my eyes fixed on Judge Ellis, refusing to give my family the satisfaction of watching me break. Then it was my father's turn. He tried to spin himself as a desperate parent, pushed too far by grief and injustice. But under Rachel's cross-examination, he cracked. He stuttered over the forged policy, contradicted himself about the emails, called them just talk. Lila fared worse. Defiant at first, she grew sulky and erratic, snapping at Rachel's questions, her neat appearance unraveling by the minute. By the time she stepped down, she looked less like a victim and more like what she truly was, a conspirator. And then, on the third day, the trial took a turn no one saw coming. Judge Ellis called a sudden recess, summoning both legal teams into her chambers. The courtroom filled with anxious murmurs. When she returned, her face was grave. New evidence has come to light, she announced, her voice carrying over the restless crowd. It directly impacts the motives in this case. The bailiff handed folders to each team. My heart pounded as Rachel flipped ours open. I caught a glimpse of a birth certificate. Old, legal documents. Judge Ellis's gaze swept the room. Documents show that the defendant, Lila Begay, is not the biological daughter of Martin and Amanda Begay. The words dropped like a bomb. The room gasped. My blood ran cold. She was legally adopted, the judge continued, from a cousin of Mr. Begay's after a family tragedy. She was raised as their own, but this was never disclosed to her. I turned toward Lila. Her face was drained of color, her mouth open in silent shock. My parents sat frozen, my father's jaw tight, my mother clutching her purse like it could shield her from the truth. There is more, Judge Ellis pressed on. Evidence shows that Martin and Amanda Begay attempted to alter Evelyn Hayes's will 2 years before her death, using forged documents to redirect assets. Mrs. Hayes discovered this and revised her will with added protections to ensure Nia inherited vintage treasures. The judge held up a letter written in Evelyn's familiar script, detailing her distrust of her son and daughter-in-law, her certainty that I was the only one who valued her legacy. The courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling furiously, spectators whispering. Lila's voice cracked, raw and broken. You lied to me, she screamed at my father. My whole life was a lie? The bailiff rushed forward as she staggered, shaking, nearly lunging at him. Judge Ellis banged her gavel, ordering her removed until she calmed down. My father slumped in his seat, muttering, It's true. I sat frozen, my entire body numb. The betrayal had layers deeper than I ever imagined. Not just arson, not just fraud. My whole family had been built on secrets and lies. The trial ended faster than I expected once the truth came out. With the forged insurance policy, the damning emails, and now the shocking revelation of forged wills and hidden adoption, my father and Lila had nowhere left to hide. Their lawyer's booming confidence shriveled into a hushed whisper. On the final day, Judge Ellis delivered her verdict. The air in the courtroom felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. "Martin Begay," she said, her voice steady and sharp as a blade. "You are found guilty of arson, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. You are sentenced to 5 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $75,000. My father didn't flinch. He sat rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though he could will away reality by refusing to acknowledge it. But I saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the tiny tremor in his hands. "Lila Begay," Judge Ellis continued, "you are found guilty of arson and conspiracy. You are sentenced to 3 years in prison, with mandatory counseling upon release. You are also ordered to contribute to the restitution owed." Lila's composure shattered. "This isn't fair," she cried, her voice echoing across the chamber. I didn't know they lied to me about everything." Tears streaked her cheeks as the bailiff stepped closer. For a brief moment, I almost saw the frightened child she must have once been. But then I remembered the glass shattering across my shop floor, the venom in her voice, the flames that consumed Evelyn's legacy, and my sympathy hardened into stone. My mother wept silently in the back, clutching her purse, but never once looking at me. Not with sorrow, not with regret, only with the hollow stare of a woman who had chosen her side long ago. Judge Ellis's final words sealed it. "This court will not tolerate greed and betrayal dressed as family loyalty. Justice has been served." The gavel cracked against the wood. It was over. Or so it should have been. Outside, reporters swarmed again, their microphones thrust into my face, shouting questions. "How do you feel about your family's conviction? Do you believe justice was done? What comes next for you, Nia?" I couldn't answer. My body moved on instinct, pushing past cameras, my attorney shielding me as I stumbled toward the courthouse steps. My phone vibrated non-stop calls from journalists, emails with subject lines screaming about the arson family scandal. No. The headlines spread like wildfire. Family secrets torch San Francisco antique shop. Adoption, Lee Sparks arson case. From heirloom to ashes, the Begay trial. And yet, despite the world buzzing, I felt nothing but emptiness. There was no victory in watching my family in shackles, no triumph in seeing them led away by deputies. What was left inside me was a hollow ache, a cavern carved out by years of favoritism, betrayal, and finally, destruction. I thought justice would bring peace. Instead, it left me standing alone, clutching Evelyn's locket as though it were the only thing tethering me to the earth. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed outside my window. My grandmother's laughter echoed faintly in my mind, like a ghost brushing past my ear. I whispered into the silence, "I did it, Grandma. I honored you. But why does it hurt so much?" The truth hit me like a weight pressing down on my chest. Winning in court couldn't bring back her smile, her stories, or the warm light of vintage treasures on a winter morning. Justice was necessary, but it didn't heal. And somewhere deep inside, I knew my battle wasn't over. The ashes still held pieces of me, fragments of her, and I had to decide what to do with them. A year after the fire, I stood on the empty lot where vintage treasures once stood. The ashes were long cleared, the ground leveled, but the memories still clung to the air. I could almost hear the faint chime of the front bell, see Evelyn leaning on the counter with that knowing smile. For months, I couldn't bring myself to step foot here. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too deep. But with the restitution from my father and Lila, my own savings, and a small business loan, I finally had the means and the courage to rebuild, not just the store, myself. I named it Elizabeth's Keepsakes, in honor of Evelyn. The new building blended the old and the new reclaimed brick walls, salvaged from demolition sites, stained glass accents inspired by Evelyn's sketches, modern energy-efficient lighting, and a sleek event space for history talks. It felt like a bridge between her legacy and my future. In the months leading up to the reopening, I lived and breathed every detail. The staff, some from the original shop, rallied beside me, working long hours, polishing displays, unpacking crates of antiques donated by loyal customers who wanted to see us rise again. Marin Oaks became my rock, helping me rebuild not just the shop but the wall I had around my heart. Still, the nights were hard. Some evenings, I lay awake, haunted by voices from the past, my father's cold ultimatums, my sister's drunken rage, my mother's guilt-laced pleas. Therapy became my anchor. My therapist helped me unravel years of favoritism, lies, and manipulation. She reminded me, I wasn't the problem. Their greed was. Their betrayal was. So I made the hardest choice of all, complete severance. I changed my number. Blocked their emails. Gave strict orders to my staff any call from my family. Hang up. There would be no second chances. No reconciliation. The people who were supposed to protect me had tried to destroy me. They were strangers now. And then came the day of the grand opening. We chose the date carefully, Evelyn's birthday. As dawn broke, a line stretched down the block. Old customers, new faces, neighbors, tourists, all waiting. The Chronicle ran a feature titled, From Ashes to Keepsakes, A Granddaughter's Fight for Legacy. When I cut the ribbon, my hands trembled, but not from fear, from pride, from survival. Inside, people marveled at the familiar brickwork, the gleaming cases of rare coins, the restored paintings. They signed up for the new history talks, now paired with local wine tastings. The room filled with laughter and curiosity, the kind of sound Evelyn would have loved. In my small office at the back, I hung a framed photo of her, the same one that used to sit by her register. Her smile lit the room. I whispered, "Thank you, for trusting me, for making me strong enough to stand alone." That night, as the last guests left and the lights dimmed, I realized something Evelyn had always known. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who lift you up, who see your worth, who stand beside you when the world turns cruel. From the fire, I learned that greed and manipulation can shatter even the closest bonds. But cutting ties with those who hurt you isn't weakness, it's survival. Justice in court didn't heal me, but rebuilding did. Choosing myself did. To anyone listening now, let me tell you this: protect your legacy, protect your dream, and never let anyone, family, or not dim your light. Walking away from toxic love may break your heart, but it also sets you free. So I built Elizabeth's Keepsakes not just as a store, but as proof. Proof that I could rise from nothing. Proof that Evelyn's spirit lives on. Proof that I am more than what my family tried to reduce me to. This is my story. What about yours? Tell me, what challenge has your family put you through, and how did you rise above it? Share it with me. I want to hear your fight, your resilience, your survival. Because sometimes in telling our stories, we find the freedom we've been searching for all along.